He came home early. No warning, no phone call, just the soft click of a key and the weight of a leather briefcase in his hand. Bennett Caldwell froze in the doorway of his dining room, expecting the same cold silence that had ruled his mansion since his wife died. Instead, sound hit him like a wave off-key music, children laughing, chairs scraping crumbs, and spilled food scattered across the table. And right in the middle of the chaos sat his son Eli, a boy who used a wheelchair and hadn't wanted to eat for days, smiling, really smiling. Near Eli stood the new housekeeper Monique, a black woman with warm eyes and a calm, steady posture, as if this mess wasn't a problem but a miracle. Bennett's jaw tightened. His house had rules. His grief had rules. But Monique didn't force Eli to eat or scold the boys, Caleb and Noah. She simply pulled up a chair, sat in front of Eli, and waited, breathing slowly, speaking softly, letting him feel safe again. And little by little, Eli began to open his mouth. A bite. Then another. That fragile progress threatened someone else's control. Dr. Harland, the family's polished specialist, who insisted more medication, more silence, more expensive treatments were necessary. Monique didn't argue with emotion. She watched, she wrote everything down, and she recognized the pattern from her own past tragedy. When Bennett finally saw the truth, fear being sold as care, his grip on control cracked. And for the first time since his wife's death, he chose his son's life over his own silence. That night, the mansion didn't feel expensive. It felt hollow. The hallway lights glowed on polished floors, but they couldn't warm the air. Bennett sat alone at the edge of his bed, tie loosened, staring at a family photo he hadn't touched since the funeral. His wife's smile in that frame looked like a memory from another lifetime. Down the hall, the boys' laughter had faded into uneasy whispers, and the silence Bennett once demanded now sounded like something dangerous, like a lid pressed too tightly on a boiling pot. In Eli's room, Monique moved quietly, not like an employee trying to impress, but like someone guarding a fragile flame. She adjusted the blanket around his legs, then paused when he turned his face away from the dinner tray. No scolding. No, you have to. Just a chair pulled close, her elbows resting on her knees, her voice low enough to feel like comfort instead of pressure. I know what it is to lose the person who made the world make sense, she murmured. Eli's eyes flicked toward her, small, exhausted, but listening. His hands trembled against the armrest, and for a moment Bennett saw it clearly. His son wasn't refusing food to be difficult. He was refusing life, because life had stopped feeling safe. Bennett hovered in the doorway, fingers curled around the frame like he needed something solid to hold on to. He'd tried schedules, rules, doctors, silence, anything that looked like control. But watching Monique sit there and simply stay, he felt something crack in his chest. Grief wasn't something you could manage with order. It had to be faced. And the next morning, when Dr. Harland's shiny shoes crossed the threshold again, Bennett's voice didn't come out cold. It came out shaken, finally awake. Dr. Harland didn't knock like a guest, he entered like a verdict. The faint scent of cologne arrived before him, followed by the sharp tap of polished shoes on marble. He glanced at Eli, the way people glance at a chart, quick, clinical, detached. Then opened his folder and let the papers do the talking. His weight is down again, he said, eyes never softening. We can't risk stimulation. No noise, no excitement. More medication, more sessions. Across the room, Eli sat in his wheelchair, like a small shadow of himself. His chin tucked, lashes low, the breakfast tray untouched. A week ago, he'd taken a few bites for Monique. Today, he couldn't even look at the spoon. His fingers worried the edge of his blanket, twisting and twisting as if he could wring the sadness out of it. Bennett swallowed hard. He wanted something simple, an answer he could buy, a plan he could enforce. He'd already turned grief into rules, quiet hallways, scheduled meals, lights out at the same time every night. And still, Caleb pushed his food around. Noah stared at the ceiling at bedtime, eyes wide, pretending he wasn't listening for a mother who would never come. Monique stood near the doorway, still as a guardrail. Her gaze stayed on Eli, not the doctor's paperwork. "Silence isn't protecting him," she said softly. "It's burying him." Dr. Harlan's mouth tightened. "You're not a clinician." Monique didn't flinch. She lowered herself beside Eli, close enough that he could feel her presence without being trapped by it. "Look at me," she whispered. "Just breathe with me. And if you're watching this thinking, it's just food, listen. This was never about food." Eli wasn't fading because he couldn't walk. He was fading because the one person who made him feel safe was gone. And everyone else kept trying to fix his heart with silence. Monique waited until Dr. Harlan's car disappeared down the long driveway before she exhaled. The house felt like it had been holding its breath, 2 walls listening, floors remembering. In the kitchen, Caleb and Noah sat at the table, with their shoulders hunched, forks tapping softly against plates they didn't want. And Eli stared at his food like it was a stranger. Monique didn't rush him. She didn't bargain. She didn't say, "Come on, sweetheart." She simply pulled out the chair across from him and sat down steady, present, unshaken. Her hands rested open on the table, palms up like she was offering time instead of pressure. "Whenever you're ready," she said, voice low enough to feel private. Eli's eyes lifted slow, cautious, like a door opening a crack. His lips trembled, then pressed tight again. A long minute passed. Then another. The boys stopped fidgeting. Even Bennett, standing near the counter, forgot to check his phone. In that silence, this different kind of silence, Eli's shoulders loosened a fraction. Monique nodded once, almost to herself, and began to hum under her breath. Not a performance, just a simple, worn melody, the kind a mother might hum while folding laundry. Eli blinked hard, swallowing something that wasn't food. His fingers unclenched from the blanket. Then, like it cost him everything, he leaned forward and opened his mouth. One small bite, then a second. Caleb's eyes widened. Noah let out a shaky laugh that sounded like relief. Bennett felt heat rise behind his eyes, the kind he'd been choking down for months. Because in that moment he finally saw it. Monique hadn't fixed Eli with rules or medicine. She'd brought him back with patience presence, and the courage to let the house live again. Dr. Harlan came back the next morning, like he hadn't been challenged at all. Same crisp suit, same smooth smile that never reached his eyes. He didn't look at the crumbs on the table or the faint spark in Eli's face. He looked at control, and he wanted it back. "We need to increase the dosage," he said, flipping open his folder as if it were scripture. "More medication. More sessions. Less stimulation. This is not the time for noise." Eli sat very still in his wheelchair, the spoon Monique had placed near his hand untouched. His breathing was shallow, like he was bracing for something he couldn't name. Caleb's knee bounced under the table. Noah stared at the doctor's hands, not his face, like he was watching a weapon. Monique didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to win with emotion. She simply stepped forward and spoke like someone who'd been listening for the truth all along. "Yesterday you weren't here," she said evenly. Eli ate. He smiled. He held eye contact. "Today you walk in, and he shuts down." For a beat, the room went quiet. So quiet Bennett could hear the refrigerator hum, could hear his own pulse in his ears. Dr. Harlan let out a quick, sharp chuckle. "Coincidence," he said too fast. But Bennett felt it then, something cold slipping into place. Fear. Urgency. A price tag attached to every warning. And the strangest part was how Eli seemed to wilt the moment that man entered the room, like his little body recognized danger before Bennett's mind could. Monique opened her notebook and laid it on the table. Pages filled with dates, meals, reactions, dosage, changes, good days circled, bad days underlined. "This isn't a feeling," she said softly. "It's a pattern." Bennett stared at those lines until the numbers blurred, because suddenly he understood what Monique had been fighting for: not just Eli's appetite, but Eli's chance to live without being kept small for someone else's profit. That afternoon, Monique didn't celebrate the small victory of being heard. She prepared for war. When the boys finally drifted to the living room and the house slipped into a fragile quiet, she sat at the kitchen counter with her notebook open and her phone in her hand. Her thumb hovered over an old number she hadn't called in years. Then she pressed dial. "Darnell," she whispered, when a man answered, voice rough with sleep. "It's Monique. I need you to listen. I think a doctor is hurting a child, the same way they hurt my family." On the other end, silence, then a breath. "Tell me everything." That night, Monique barely slept. She kept hearing Dr. Harlan's smooth voice, more medication, more silence, and underneath it she heard another sound, older and sharper, the quiet of a house after a child stops laughing for good. Before sunrise, she moved through the kitchen like a shadow, setting plates, warming oatmeal, cutting soft fruit into small pieces. Caleb and Noah ate with nervous, watchful eyes. Eli woke up pale, his lips slightly blue around the edges, his head heavier than yesterday. Monique pressed the back of her fingers to his forehead and felt a chill that didn't belong. "Baby, stay with me," she murmured, kneeling beside his wheelchair. The doorbell rang. Dr. Harlan strode in fast papers in hand, urgency painted on his face like a mask. "We need the injection now," he snapped. Monique stepped between him and Eli, calm, steady, unmovable. "Not until I see the dosage." His eyes flashed. "You don't give orders here." Bennett appeared at the doorway, drawn by the tension, and in that split second, Eli trembling, Monique blocking the path, Dr. Harlan reaching for his bag, Bennett realized this wasn't medicine. It was power, and someone had been using his grief as the key. Bennett's eyes locked on the syringe the way a man looks at a snake in his own living room. Dr. Harlan held it up like it was routine, like it was mercy, while Eli's hands began to shake against the wheelchair armrests, his breath turning thin and fast. Monique didn't move. She planted her feet, shoulders square, body between that needle and that child. "That dose is higher than yesterday," she said, voice quiet, but unbreakable. "Why?" Dr. Harlan's smile cracked at the edges. "Because I'm the doctor," he snapped, and the room seemed to shrink around his anger. Eli made a sound, small, strained, then, like it cost him everything, he forced out a word. "Please." That single word hit Bennett harder than any report or lab result. His son wasn't performing. He was begging. Caleb grabbed Eli's fingers. Noah's face went white, and Bennett felt something inside him finally tip, like grief and guilt had been stacked for months, waiting for one last push. Monique opened her notebook with a sharp, practiced motion and slid it across the table. Pages covered in dates, dosages, meals, tremors, smiles, good days and bad days lined up like a confession. Then she pulled up a video clip on her phone, ready to show the pattern the way the truth likes to be shown, plain, undeniable. "This isn't me talking," she said. "This is him reacting." Dr. Harlan's eyes flicked just once toward the door, toward escape, toward damage control. And Bennett caught it. That flash of fear, that instinct to run. He heard his own voice before he felt it leave his chest. Low, steady, final. "Put it down," Bennett said. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted away from the man in the suit, and back to the family that had almost been silenced to death. Dr. Harlan didn't explode. He smiled slow and cold, like Bennett had just signed something without reading it. "You're making a tragic mistake," he said, lowering the syringe with theatrical patience. "And when he crashes, the blame won't be on me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Bennett felt them trying to crawl into his chest and make a home there. Fear, guilt, panic. But Monique's hand landed gently on Eli's shoulder, steady as a heartbeat. Eli's eyes were wide, glossy, tracking every adult face, like he was searching for the one that would protect him. A few hours later, Bennett's phone buzzed. Dr. Harlan's voice came through calm, almost satisfied. "I filed a report," he said. "Medical oversight will be contacting you." Bennett's stomach dropped. He looked at Monique, and for the first time he saw the cost in her expression. She wasn't just risking a job. She was standing in the path of a man who knew how to weaponize paperwork. Then the doorbell rang. 2 inspectors stood on the porch with clipboards and practiced neutrality. "We received a formal complaint," one said. "We need to verify the child's treatment." Behind them, Dr. Harlan appeared perfectly composed, concern painted on his face like makeup. Eli flinched at the sight of him. His breath hitched. Caleb stepped closer to his brother. Noah's hands balled into fists he didn't know what to do with. Monique moved in front of Eli's chair without thinking. "Don't touch him," she said, voice shaking but firm. The inspector's tone hardened. "Interfering can be interpreted as guilt." Bennett felt the old version of himself, silent, obedient, terrified, reach for control. But then Eli whimpered, small and raw, and Bennett saw the truth. This wasn't oversight. It was intimidation. He opened the door wider, eyes locked on Dr. Harlan. "Get out," Bennett said. What Harlan blinked. "Out of my house," Bennett repeated louder this time, clear enough for his sons to hear, clear enough for Monique to believe. "Consequences can come. I'm done being afraid." That night, the house didn't feel safe, even with the locks turned. The chandeliers still glittered, the security system still blinked, but Bennett sat on the sofa with his phone in his hand, like it was a lifeline, staring at the dark hallway, listening to every creak, like it might be footsteps. Somewhere upstairs, Caleb and Noah had crawled into the same bed. 2 small bodies pressed together, whispering themselves into sleep the way kids do when they're trying not to be scared. Monique stayed beside Eli. She didn't scroll. She didn't pace. She watched his chest rise and fall, counting the breaths the way you count seconds in a storm. Then, close to dawn, Eli startled awake with a thin cry, more pain than sound. His face twisted, and he whispered, barely there, "It hurts." Monique's fingers found his arm, and she went still. A small purple dot, fresh, wrong. Bennett was in the doorway in 2 steps. "What happened?" His voice cracked, raw from holding too much in for too long. Monique didn't soften it. "He was medicated," she said, steady but shaking at the edges. "After you kicked them out." Bennett's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "That's impossible." Monique's eyes lifted, dark and certain. Then someone came back. For a second, Bennett's mind refused to move until a memory snapped into place. The quiet nurse who always followed Dr. Harlan's orders, the one who never met anyone's eyes. Bennett grabbed his phone and called security like a man waking up from a nightmare. "Pull the cameras, now." Minutes later, the screen flickered hallway footage, a shadow sliding down the corridor, the nurse entering Eli's room with a familiar medical bag and a syringe. Monique covered her mouth. Bennett hit record with trembling hands. She opened her notebook and laid it beside the video like a final piece of a puzzle. Dates, dosages, reactions. Now the proof wasn't just a feeling, it was a chain. Eli's breathing rattled. He reached out weak and caught Bennett's finger. "Dad?" he whispered. Bennett knelt down, pressing his forehead to his son's hand. "I'm here," he promised this time like it meant something. Monique Podna lifted her phone. "Police," she said quietly. "We have evidence. And we have a child in danger." The sirens didn't feel like triumph when they finally arrived. They felt like air after months underwater. Blue lights washed across the front windows, turning the mansion's white walls into something unreal, like a movie set built around a family's worst year. Bennett stood in the foyer with his hands clenched at his sides, watching officers move with calm, practiced speed. Behind him, Monique kept one arm around Eli's shoulders, her other hand resting on his chest, as if she could physically hold him steady. When the nurse was led out, Bennett didn't cheer. He didn't even speak. He just stared, because the rage was too big for words, and the shame sat underneath it heavier than the anger. He kept thinking about every time he'd trusted a clean suit and a confident voice. Every time he'd chosen protocol over his own child's eyes. Upstairs, Caleb and Noah peeked from the landing, their faces pale in the flashing lights. Eli's fingers tightened around Bennett's hand, the grip weak but unmistakably their proof that his son was still fighting. Bennett bent close, voice breaking into something honest. "Nobody touches you again," he whispered. "Not ever." Days later, the headlines spread, Dr. Harland arrested. Fraud. Patient manipulation. Abuse hidden behind paperwork and fear. Bennett listened to it all in silence, but it didn't feel like justice, yet it felt like a mirror. And he didn't like what he saw. That evening, he asked Monique to meet him at the table. No clipboard, no rules, just a man with wet eyes and a shaking breath. "I was wrong," he said, swallowing hard. "About everything." Monique didn't gloat. She simply nodded, as if she'd been waiting for him to finally wake up. "Stay," Bennett said, "not as staff, as family." Eli lifted his hand trembling and reached for hers. "Monique." He managed the name coming out like a miracle. Monique smiled through tears. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Dinner that night wasn't a performance. It was a risk. The table was set, but not like before. No printed schedules. No stern reminders. No quiet voices. Just simple food-warm plates, and 3 boys watching one another like they were learning a new language. Bennett sat with his shoulders lowered for the first time in months, his hands open on the table instead of clenched around control. Monique moved through the room slowly, not as staff, not as a guest, more like someone who finally belonged. Eli stared at his bowl, the spoon resting near his fingers. The room held its breath. Caleb's foot stopped bouncing. Noah's eyes shined wide and nervous. Bennett didn't command. He didn't bargain. He just leaned forward, voice rough and gentle. "Whatever you can do, I'm proud of you." Monique took the seat across from Eli and hummed that same soft melody barely louder than a heartbeat. Eli's throat worked as he swallowed fear before he swallowed food. His hand trembled, then steadied inch by inch until his fingers wrapped around the spoon. He lifted it, a tiny scoop. A pause. Then slowly he brought it to his mouth and ate. Noah burst into a laugh that sounded like relief breaking. Caleb clapped once, then again, unable to stop. Bennett's face crumpled, and when the tears came, he didn't turn away. He let his sons see him, really see him, grief and love in the same breath. After dinner, the instruments came out like an old promise, returning a little drum, a battered guitar, a flute that couldn't stay in tune. The boys played anyway, too loud, too messy, gloriously imperfect. Eli tried to clap along, missing the beat and smiling at it. Bennett stood in the doorway, watching his mansion finally shrink into something the right size. Monique nudged him with a quiet grin. "They're still loud." Bennett wiped his cheeks and nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "Now it makes sense." The days after the arrest didn't feel like a victory parade. They felt like a slow return to oxygen. Word traveled fast. Neighbors whispered. News alerts buzzed. People who had never stepped inside Bennett Caldwell's home suddenly had opinions about what should have happened sooner. Bennett heard it all and kept his head down because the loudest voice was still his own, the one that said, "You almost lost your boy." But inside the house, something gentler was spreading. Morning light started landing on the kitchen table again. Caleb and Noah stopped eating like they were bracing for bad news. Eli began waking up with his eyes open, really open, tracking sounds following movement, reaching for his spoon without being asked. On the good mornings, he even tried a few words, each one soft and shaky like a newborn thing learning to stand. And Monique became the quiet center of it all. Not a miracle worker, not a saint, just a woman who refused to quit on a child when quitting would have been easier. She laughed with the boys when the music went off key. She sat with Bennett in the evenings when the grief came back heavy, and she didn't rush him out of it. Sometimes she'd just say, "I know," and that was enough. One afternoon, Bennett found Eli in the living room with the little drum balanced on his lap, tapping a slow, uneven rhythm, while Caleb strummed the old guitar and Noah tried to keep up on that stubborn flute. The sound was messy and bright, filling every corner that used to feel haunted. Bennett leaned against the doorway, eyes wet. And for the first time, he didn't see what his family had lost. He saw what they'd built. He looked at Monique and spoke like a man finally telling the truth out loud. "It's never too late, is it?" Monique smiled tired, real proud. "Not if you don't give up," she said. And in the middle of that imperfect music, Bennett understood family isn't just blood. It's the people who stay. The comment section became a strange kind of echo chamber after everything broke. Some people offering prayers, others tossing blame like it was cheap. Bennett read a few lines, then set his phone face down on the counter. He didn't need strangers to tell him what he already knew. He'd let fear run his house, and fear almost took his son. In the living room, Eli's soft laugh cut through the noise of the outside world, and it pulled Bennett back to what mattered. Caleb was showing Eli how to tap the little drum again, slow, uneven beats, while Noah tried to match it on that wheezing flute. Monique leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed, smiling like she'd seen this exact kind of mess save a life before. Bennett stepped beside her, watching his boys fill the space with sound, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not perfection, but peace. He cleared his throat, voice low. This house used to be so big, it felt empty. Monique didn't look away from the kids. "That's what silence does," she said. Eli glanced up at his dad and lifted the drumstick like a tiny salute. Bennett's eyes burned again, but this time he didn't fight it. He let the tears come because he finally understood that starting over doesn't require a spotless past, just a brave next step. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the illness. It's the fear that makes us hand our power away. Ask questions. Notice patterns. And when someone in your life is hurting, don't underestimate the healing power of simply staying. If this story hit you anywhere deep, drop a comment. What's one moment in your life when someone stayed and it changed everything? And if you want more emotional, twist-filled stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because the next story might be the one you didn't know you needed.